Lucky Boys Podcast.
Welcome to Lucky Boys Podcast. I'm Will.
And I'm Norm, and we have two very special guests here today, Anna and Chloe from the Mott Street Girls. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Chloe.
I'm Anna. We are the Mott Street Girls.
AKA MSG.
Yes.
MSG. That's
Was that on purpose?
Back.
Yes.
Yeah.
When we were thinking of creating the name, coming up with a business name, we actually have a couple. I think the first one we were like, okay, we're going to set on this one was Overheard on Mott Street. And then somehow we thought of Mott Street because we had dinner on Mott Street, and they were like, Mott Street Girls stands for MSG.
It's just more catchy than Overheard on Mott Street. So that's why we ended up choosing Mott Street Girls.
Yeah, and then obviously we want to demystify the fact that MSG is only on like in Chinese American food. It's in other foods too, like Doritos. And
That's true.
Yeah, so then
I love
like,
Doritos.
and obviously it's like within our mission as well to talk a little bit more about like Chinese American history and spread that to the community.
All right. And you're from Boston and you're from Jersey.
Yeah.
And you guys are here in New York City's Chinatown. You guys got together, you guys told me earlier, because you guys were part of the museum in Chinatown. Mm-hmm. And from then you guys felt, I guess during the time of COVID with Asian hate, when that was starting to erupt and become more transparent, that's when your organization began?
Yeah, so we kind of had the idea because, we started volunteering at the museum July of 2019. So we were part of a training program to become tour guides at the museum. And it was around like February or March of 2020 when the museum was temporarily shut down. And, me and Anna had some extra time on our hands. We're working from home. So we just got together and was thinking like, how can we continue to lead tours when the museum was shut down? And so that's when we thought of bringing our tour onto the streets. And it just worked out, like the timing, in light of anti-Asian hate, we felt that our tours was what our community needed. Like more education, more empathy.
Yeah, I think it made it more important, right? Because Chinese American history isn't taught in school. So like growing up, neither Chloe and I, like we didn't know about like what Chinese American history was until we went out and seeked out that part of history. And then we want to spread it to, everyone who is interested, like growing up Asian American or Chinese American, some people might not know.
It wasn't taught in our education system. And when you growing up back in the day, it wasn't like you could easily have access to this information without, I guess, doing some real investigation and digging and looking for, you have to purposely want to seek this out. Now, how did you find this information? Was it all like Google or... because Norm and I guess we're kind of aging ourselves. Well, I'm aging us here. But we had the Encyclopedia Britannica. That was as far as it got in the public library.
Yeah, there was no Wikipedia back then.
Yeah, so I was actually a tour guide in Boston, right? So in high school, I joined a youth group, and they basically will help, Asian American youth. And one part of the program was to focus on giving tours of Boston's Chinatown. So that's when it initially sparked my interest. And then, moving to New York, it's like I wanted to do the same thing. So I visited Museum of Chinese in America, and they have volunteer opportunities. And that's where me and Chloe were trained in giving tours, and then as well as learning the Chinese American history. And that's how we built on top of it, right? And also like reading different books and, this good way, Googling is usually really good. But that's kind of how we learned about Chinese American history.
Yeah, so back in college, I was pretty involved in Manhattan's Chinatown, like with a lot of volunteering. I was teaching ESL classes, citizenship classes, and also involved in like a healthcare clinic here in Chinatown. And so after I graduated from college, I was thinking of, can I get back into the Chinatown scene? And so I was Googling and I found out the volunteer opportunity at the museum, and I just joined the training program. And through that training program, that's how I got like the overview of the Chinese American history, from, why the Chinese first came to America to modern day Chinese American struggles in this country.
There are a lot of misconceptions about Chinese American history specifically. How do you know which ones are false?
I feel like we would need a little bit of examples.
Do you run into a lot of stories where you have to fact check?
I think it just depends if we're using like reliable sources. For example, when we're at the museum, obviously there were like artifacts in front of us. When we're on Instagram, like we usually look at, reputable sources. Like for example, the Chinese museum over in I think it's like CHSA.
Oh, the
museum.
one in like Seattle in the Pacific
Yeah,
Northwest.
so I usually go to the museums for sources.
Yeah, and we do look at like some sources. Like I'm actually a graduate student, so I actually utilize my school's like resources at the library sometimes. But some books we have to buy, but a lot of like books that we read are sometimes scholarly, like scholar books. So then we would kind of dig in that type of history as well. But a lot of the things that we do are Googling as well. But we focus a lot on the information that we already know from the museum.
Yeah.
What are some examples of Chinese American history that you think should be taught in schools?
I think the most important is the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, because that explains a lot, right? It explains why, Chinese Americans or Chinese people has been here for such a really long time, but is still considered a minority because of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act.
Can you go into detail on that?
Yeah.
For those that don't know.
Give us a tour.
Yeah, give us a tour. What's up?
So the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act did three things, right? So it limited women and children coming into United States. It also made like getting citizenship really difficult. What was the third thing?
Interracial marriage was forbidden, and also they set a strict quota of 105 Chinese laborers that could come in here.
Oh, wow.
And that was for 60 years until
Yeah.
1943,
43, yeah.
and when they got rid of the Chinese Exclusion Act. But even though they got rid of it, it was kind of like still there because it was like you can still have a quota of 105 people, immigrant workers coming in. It wasn't until like 1965 where the civil rights movement really kind of got rid of all the quotas and everyone had kind of come into the country.
Was that the first example of systematic racism towards Asian Americans?
Yes, I think 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was the only law that banned one group of people. And I think that comes from being like, systemic racism.
I hear different stories. This is why I asked that question earlier. If, fact checking some stories, because this is a story that I've heard, and it was from one of the activists that was on our show. And off the record, he was just telling me, well, the cameras weren't rolling, but we were having this conversation. And he believes that the Chinese Exclusion Act was put in place because there were a lot of Chinese men that were getting women outside of their own culture. And they didn't like that. And that became a huge issue. And it wasn't even the jobs because they were in their own communities working for the most part. But they didn't like it when they dated outside their communities. And that was really to control that.
I think it's definitely multiple factors because one thing that the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was that it banned interracial marriage. So I think that definitely played a part. But another thing was that in the 1870s, there was an economic depression. And so the Chinese people were an easy scapegoat to blame all the economic problems onto, right? That they're taking the Americans' jobs, they're willing to work for lower wages, which is like not new at all, right? If you think back to modern times with every new immigrant group that comes in here, right? They're just like an easy finger to point at because they don't speak English, they don't look like us, right?
They can't speak up against
The majority, right?
against the false narratives put on them.
Yeah, I don't think he's particularly wrong, but I also don't think he's particularly right? So he's just like narrowing one, focus on one reason. But if you look at the bigger picture, it's like multiple factors, like Chloe said.
What do you think was the straw that broke the camel's back? Was it the jobs? Was it the interracial dating? Was it we just look different and it was just something that they just couldn't take anymore?
Well, I think you have to see who's in control, right? Like, who are the people who are making these laws, right? So, like, the people who are making those laws are like, they want to maintain in power, right? So, but if you have a lot of, Chinese people coming over from like Asian countries, then like, if they dominate, they could potentially get rid of them and they become like more powerful, right? So I think one part of it is like why, if they want to maintain quote unquote whiteness in the US, then it's like, then we should, limit the amount of like Asian people coming to America.
That's interesting. But back then, I don't think Chinese specifically, the Chinese population had any voting rights. So even if they had a huge, demographic, huge number, they wouldn't be able to vote out those politicians.
That is true, actually.
Yeah. But I read that, there was a lot of disagreements about, labor laws and people like the Irish, they blamed the Chinese for, taking away jobs. And so they pushed the politicians to to change laws to make sure that, this amount of work, is catered to them and not, it's catered to a specific demographic and chastise a different demographic.
Yeah, so I think at the end it still goes back to like jobs and opportunities.
Feeling threatened.
Yeah.
I had a few friends that I went to school with, and we've all heard of the Asian bubble, where these people live in Asian communities, and I'm not sure if you're part of that, right? If you were in that bubble, right? I did not grow up like that. Norm did not grow up like that, but I have a lot of friends that did, and they were in this bubble where they thought that they were somehow white adjacent, where they felt like it's all good. People don't hate us. People don't discriminate. I don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't exist. They just didn't feel that way until the pandemic happened, and it was just so blatant. Like, it was just all over social media, all over major news networks. You would see rallies, and then it would happen to you. Maybe it would hit too close to home, happen to one of your friends, and now that bubble has burst. Right? The illusion of you being safe and not being discriminated against is broken. So they're in a moment where they're going, all right, how do I get more information about this? What is going on? Right? And I have a few friends was in total denial until it happened to, I think, his cousin, where he was a victim out in the West Coast. Right? And that pushed him over the edge. I have another friend that was like, here, I told you so. You see what's going on? I told you so. It has never stopped. And some people feel like the discrimination or the systematic racism is always there, and it comes from all sides. Is history repeating itself, or has history really never changed?
Yeah, I definitely do think that, we have been facing discrimination since, the earliest days when we came to America. But I feel like due to the pandemic, people have become more emboldened to act on, these like prejudice and this, and these stereotypes of Chinese Americans because of, what our politicians have been saying, like the resentment they've been feeling, cooped up at home or losing their jobs. So, and I do kind of relate to what you're saying, the Asian bubble, because growing up in New Jersey, I did grow up in predominantly like white and East Asian kind of neighborhood. And I was very shocked because I had never like heard the racial slur before or like felt threatened for my life until like, I think it was May of 2020 when I was just walking on the streets of New York and someone like called me the racial slur and was like following me. And I felt like really scared at that moment. It never happened to me. And yeah, a similar incident happened again, like in the summer of 2020. So that was like the first time that I felt like threatened for my life. And I've been like in America for like over 20 years, and that's like the first time it's happened.
Wow. So that's exactly what I was talking about. I had a friend that experienced that, and he reached out to me. It's like, well, man, I don't know what to do. I just didn't buy in, but until it happened, then now I know it's true. Like he was in total denial for a long time, and until it happened too close to home and the whole bubble burst, he really didn't know how to digest that. And then I have another, and I just gave me an interesting perspective seeing because he wasn't wrong. That was his reality. Meanwhile, the other one has faced it his entire life. Yeah. He's just been around it. It's just been he didn't grow up in that bubble. He grew up outside of it, and he didn't grow up in the Asian community. So he was actually like the token Asian guy in there. So he was burned. And anyone, I guess Asians listening to this, or any minority, or even a white person that grew up and that was a token white guy anywhere, it would feel kind of awkward being the only one there. And depending on the neighborhood you grew up in, it could be really rough for some of these people. And to them, they feel like nothing has changed. And to this person, it's, on the other hand, like you, it's just, oh my gosh, like this is what it's like out here. When I was little, they told me this story of when I was in school. They said that this princess, she lived a beautiful life in a castle, and it was just great. Everybody was happy. There was always an abundance of everything, until the day that she stepped her foot outside the castle, and she saw there was poor people, beggars, people that were hungry, starving, children looking for scraps on the food, and she couldn't live with herself. And moral story, she just stopped living in the castle. She wanted to go out into the world and help. But I just find it fascinating. And I do ask myself that question. Has it changed? And if it hasn't, will it ever change?
And you guys are actually on the street.
Yeah.
You're boots on the ground. You're talking to people who are either visiting or they're from the neighborhood or they just want to learn about Chinese history and culture. And, and you have people who are not part of the tour. Have you experienced anything like,
Yeah, I was just going to point out there, we did experience that one time. If you remember, Chloe, we were giving a tour and one homeless person walked up to us and said, like, that's not right. And that part of history was about, like, Chinese Americans participating in World War II. And he claimed that, like, it's not about Chinese Americans, it's about, the Germans in the U.S. And I'm like, well, Chinese Americans did participate in the war and helped out the U.S. So I think there was a little bit of like, I don't know, it may be part of like the Asian hate crime. So we all obviously feel a little scared and we try to disassociate from that situation as much as possible. But I think in terms of like actually all the hate that's been happening, I think the pandemic just like exponentially increased. And like blatantly put the elephant in front of your face. Like this has been happening. You might not notice it, and it might be very discreet, right? Discreet racism is the thing where like in the workplace, like, oh, you might be overlooked, right? If you're Asian or if you're of like a minority, you just don't notice it. But the violence, you can see it, and that's like a fact, right? But there are still things that are happening that you can't see, that it is systemic racism. It has to be fixed through, the system.
It sounds like nothing has really changed except that it's more passive in a lot of ways until the pandemic happened. Now, because of the surge in violence against women, children, our elderly, it's become something that's undeniable. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I can't predict the future, but I'm like hoping, sorry, I can't speak today. So like, I just think that it's going to get better, and I'm hoping to get better from here.
How does it get better?
Well, I mean, as we've seen, like during the pandemic, unfortunately, the government wasn't helping Chinatown or community, right? A lot of the small businesses weren't qualified for federal aid like the PPP loan. But the silver lining of the story is that it had prompted a lot of second, third generation Chinese Americans to go back to their community, right? And actually make a change. For example, like the grassroots initiatives like Welcome to Chinatown or Send Chinatown Love, we see these young Asian Americans coming back to their community and using their professional skill sets, right, to helping these small business out. So I think that's like, a foot in the right direction, because for us Chinese Americans, like Chinatown is where a lot of us find our identity, right? And if we lose Chinatown, then how is our next generation going to find their identity in America, right? So I think that is already a good step forward.
And yourselves, a young up and coming organization like yourselves, also sharing the history with people who might not even know that this history exists.
Yeah, and I think it's important, at least for me, it was like very insightful because I never knew like how my family came to America. So like I would ask my dad, but like, okay, so like how did we exactly get here? And it was like very fascinating to know that my great grandpa actually came here and then went back to China. And he was just like, it was too tough. And then eventually my grandpa's sister's husband was a paper son. It took me a while.
Wow.
Yeah. And then like eventually through relationships, we all ended up in America. So it was so interesting to see like, oh, that's how we got here. And obviously if I didn't know history, I would have no idea what paper son was. And basically paper son is, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and there was a fire that happened in San Francisco that like destroyed all the documentation. So the Chinese were smart. I was like, I'm going to claim all these people as my son. They're son on paper, and they're going to pay me. And then through relationships, they can get over to America and have like a new opportunity.
No, I have a very similar story. And it's not as interesting as the paper son story, but I was asking my parents, and they're very closed off about telling the history of how, it's sort of like a history that I don't want to talk about it,
You have to ask.
Yeah, I have to ask. I have to like kind of poke, sleeping bear. But it so happened we would go to a cemetery and we would go and buy sun, which is basically sweeping the tomb and it's, to me, it's like when I was growing up, it's like a picnic because we just bring food to the cemetery and we're with family. I mean, and we're eating and
Picnic at the grave.
also, also paying respects to our ancestors.
Yeah.
So we go to this tomb, and it had the name Dan Lee on the tomb. My last name is Lamb, so I'm like, who's Dan Lee? But apparently, he's my great grandfather, and he came in the 1900s, and apparently the immigration officer wrote the wrong name, and he became a Lee. But I'm a Lamb, But it's so interesting. Like, he came over, he gave the opportunity for my grandfather to come over. And, even the history of how they survived China back in the day. Like, my grandfather escaped China during the Cultural Revolution because he was a teacher. He went to Hong Kong and brought, my entire family to Hong Kong. And my grandma had this whole, like, journey trying to, with a baby, traveling to Hong Kong from China. It was, and she had to pretend to say, like, I have a baby and my kids are dead. So the soldiers would let her go into Hong Kong. Wow. So the journey that they had, I didn't even know the story until I asked my relatives. So it's sort of like you have all this history and these secrets, but they're so rich, and then you just get you just don't know, and people just don't know outside of our families. People don't know. And it's amazing that you get a chance to share that, with people who are not part of the community. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think what really pushed me to figure out like my history or my parents' history or my ancestors' history was because I was speaking to a friend and she for some reason know all of her history. I think she was her mother actually for a book jot down all the history, and I was just like, I don't know any of my family's history. I mean, I know Chinese American history, but how do we fit into that picture, right? And they would tell me. That's a great question. Yeah, and they would tell me oh, the railroad, and I'm like, okay, but what happened during the railroad? He was like, it's a significant part of history. So my parents know, but they don't know exactly the entire story. And for me, it's going out and figuring that and putting that together. And for me, so I can tell, my offsprings and obviously everyone who are interested to know, my brother who doesn't know. So it's just keeping track of how things happened, why we came here, when we came here, and all the difficulties that my grandparents and my parents have to go through. Yeah, it's incredible when you hear these stories like Norm just shared, you just shared, and I mean, everyone's stories of how their family came to America is quite daunting, and I just can't imagine just going through that. I mean, when I think I have it hard, I just think about my parents and what they had to do, and I'm going, okay, if they can be that resilient, and I came from them, I have a lot more that I'm not giving myself credit for that I can probably push. This is probably my 40%, and I'm complaining about it. My parents are that resilient, and your parents and our grandparents, and we have a lot that we can accomplish if they can do that. We certainly can. I think going back to the whole Asian discrimination, systematic racism, will it change? Will it get better? I think if we can continue to have conversations, which we are, I think if we can continue to make our voices heard, educate our communities, not even just Asian communities, everyone, so that they could know the facts. Because then I have this whole other segment of my friends or colleagues who aren't Asian, and a lot of them just have this surface Asian knowledge because it's not taught in school, and doesn't make them evil, it doesn't make them bad guys, it's just what they were taught. And so they just see what they learn on TV and what they hear in schools, right? And they see in school, on mainstream media, what do you see? Nerds. Yeah, I was going to bring up the model minority myth, right? Because submissive, you're very rich, wealthy, and I could tell you that doesn't surmise the majority of us. Yes. So I want to bring up the model minority myth because during it's only a year ago, which is kind of crazy, when all the attacks were on Asian people, I was feeling really sad and unhappy, right? But then I had a lot of Asian friends that reached out to me, but I realized a lot of non-Asian friends did not reach out to me. And I think partly it's because they think that we'll be okay. And I think that stemmed from the model minority myth, right? Or maybe it's just because they don't know how to approach the situation, or it's like their first time seeing or witnessing something like that. And like you mentioned earlier, like this is not taught in school, like Chinese American history is taught in school, not taught in school. So they might not know how to react to it as well.
Yeah.
But if you're a human being, at least reach out.
Yeah.
I don't even see it as a race thing. You know,
Yeah.
it's just humanity.
Our non-Asian friends that reached out to us, I mean, I was super, I don't even know what to say about that because it was unexpected. I don't expect anything from anyone. And at that point where most people were like, I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people was either just brushed it under the rug, right? It was just an inconvenient truth for them. And the other people they didn't think it was that serious yet. I mean, I'm talking about the beginnings of it, right? Because when their bubble was beginning to burst, when their reality was shaken and thinking like, no, it's really not that bad. Come on, you guys got it good. Things like that. And just the overly optimistic view about it instead of looking at it for what it truly is. And then to have our friends reach out to us early on when it was happening, I thought that was, it was touching. And when it kept happening though, and then when it became undeniable, when it was just everywhere, then they said, hey, you know what? It got to the point where if I was going out, if they were like, hey, Will, are you going out with so-and-so's birthday? Hey, be careful, okay? Because number one, you're probably going to be the Asian guy there, only Asian guy there. Just be careful. And then I was just like, yeah, that's... wow, thank you. I appreciate that. But we shouldn't feel like that. You shouldn't have to give a tour and have someone shouting over you and trying to change a fact from his opinion, right? You shouldn't have someone follow you where you feel unsafe because they don't like the way you look, or maybe they do like the way you look and they just can't control themselves, right? And you see an Asian person, an Asian woman for that fact, and now you're at risk of being assaulted, right? Because you're certainly being verbally assaulted. Now, I just don't feel like I should be going somewhere and just looking at the color of my skin or my physical features and go, oh, watch out, Will. You're the only one that's going to look like that there, so be careful. Like, what? Well, I mean, just hearing that sentence just sounds insane to me. But because the world is the way it is, it's not that insane, is it?
I mean, we grew up in a rough. I mean, like it wasn't all rainbows and sunshines. We grew up in a pretty diverse but kind of rough neighborhood. So I wasn't surprised growing up or having to deal with it.
I know that, but being in this modern age and for others, it shouldn't still be happening. We're not even getting the help we need. Look, I'm gonna share a story what Don told me right before when we were coming up here. Someone threw a rock, and if you guys are looking at it, it's a rock. This is like a small boulder, right? It's
not a pebble.
It's not a pebble. It like
hurts.
Yeah,
it's big enough to break glass. So
it's like the size of my foot, and I'm a size 13, right? So it's literally like that. So I guess that's the best way I can put it. And he was standing by the window, and these kids went, and I hope Don doesn't mind me sharing the story, but these kids chucked his rock at the window, and he was unaware of it until he was startled with the sound. Mm-hmm. And if there wasn't a plexiglass there behind the window to make it shatterproof, then it would have struck him easily. It would have went right through the window and struck him in the head. And I don't even want to think what would have happened. Oh, there we go. We got the siren every podcast.
Can I go get my jacket?
It would have struck them. So what he did, he called the cops, he called the police, and when he went to go file a report, they told him at the local precinct, they told him to hang up and dial 911. I mean, they told him go back and dial 911. And then when the detectives showed up, or whoever, he told me that they told him and unless you have footage, we can't help you. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's just kids being kids. And this is reminiscent. This is reminiscent of what happened to the 89-year-old grandma that was burned. I hear people saying it's just kids being kids, right? Because I believe it was a 13-year-old kid, I think they said, that did this. And when they did have local footage from one of the houses of these kids running, and you can see it. It's 3 kids, and they just, and they could have killed them. If that plexiglass wasn't there, it could have killed them. It could have seriously injured them. And who are you supposed to go to if we actually try to document these cases and report it, and it gets downplayed and saying it's just kids being kids? If our elderly gets attacked and someone's tried to set her on fire, and then we use that same excuse, it's just kids being kids. Where do we go from here then? What are we supposed to do? Who are we supposed to? Are we supposed to take the law into our own hands? Because now that's a whole different conversation. And that's not something any of us wants to do. And we don't want to do that, right? Nobody wants to go back and assault kids, right? Nobody, it doesn't even make sense. I mean, they're kids, they don't know. But something needs to be done, right? Something needs to, the threat of consequences needs to be there by law, whether it's a police officer's regulating or something needs to be, some action needs to take place in order for people in the community to feel safe.
Yeah, I think a lot of us last year were feeling very helpless. Like, I remember when I told my parents about the incident, like, their advice for me was wear a cap, like wear a mask so they can't tell you're Asian. And I'm like, that's the best we can do, is just, Do
you remember I saw on when the Asian hate started first, there were some people that made t-shirts like, I'm not Chinese, I'm this other Asian. Did you remember that? Yeah, they were people wearing t-shirts. I'm like, that's not how racism works. That's not, they don't care. They don't care.
I'm not Chinese, I'm Korean.
No one is going to ask you, hey, you Chinese or you Vietnamese? What are you, Vietnamese, Thai? Oh, I'm good with you. You Chinese? They're not, that's not how it works. Yeah. As soon as they see you, like, if they, they're racist, they're not going to feel good about it.
I think it goes back to like what we all have talked about this entire time, right? It is systemic racism. I think a lot of it has to be changed through like our systems, because our system didn't take into the fact. You didn't enjoy it.
Yeah, for I got this alfalfa thing going. Sorry for those of you guys. You know what? We might not cut that out. But I guess for those of you guys watching, for those of you watching the podcast, I guess my hair was kind of sticking up, and Norm just kind of whispered. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying it goes back to like having to change the system. I think obviously the law makes a big impact, right? Like if we have more representation,
for sure.
And creating the laws, I think that really makes a big difference.
I think creating the law is one thing. I think enforcing it's another thing, right? I just think that if a crime happens, that we, against the Asian community, we're not asking for special treatment. We're just asking that you give it the right energy, right? The right attention that it deserves, instead of saying, hey, because I can tell you a lot of people, elderly especially, that get attacked or become victims, and we all know one, by the way, they say, what's the point? It happened already. We're just gonna, I don't want to deal with all of this. I mean, they're not going to do anything anyway. That's the most part of what I hear. And then on the other side, they'll just go, hey, you guys don't report it, so how can we help you?
I think it ties back to our culture, right? Like keeping our heads down, and like, as Asians, we feel like we don't truly like belong here, so we don't want to speak out and use our rights.
I think it's how they survived. Yeah. Especially our like grandparents and our parents. It's like how they survived when they were here. Like they kept their heads down.
I don't think that works anymore.
It doesn't.
It's a different time.
Exactly.
I understand back then, because you had mobs of people that would actually, do some really real damage. Like there were massacres, in Chinatowns, like total Chinatowns destroyed because of racism. Back then, I get it. Okay, put your head down, you can survive. I get that. But nowadays, we're
It's
Asian.
like, it's more like if you don't speak up, you'll get punished.
yeah, it's
Exactly.
we're Americans now.
Yeah.
Like, the offspring of those people who came were Americans.
Yeah,
you
like
know?
us.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think it empowers people when you actually know your history, that you
Yes.
are actually part of America.
That's what I think Chloe and I we're specialized in, right? Like we aren't going to be lawmakers, but we tell stories. That's what we do best, right? And we want to educate people on Chinese American history. So right? And I think we have feedback from some of like the audience who went on our tour. It's just like, wow, I did not know any of this, right? I can draw parallels to my history. So I find that very fascinating because like we want to build empathy with each other. We want you to understand our part, our history, right? And we want to understand your history too. So I think that's very important.
And I think a lot of people do have an appreciation for it. What are some stories that some of the people on your tours find really interesting?
Well, people usually like the Bachelor Society part of the tour.
The
'cause-
Bachelor Society?
Yeah, so back in the day, because of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, women and children could come in here. So at one point, Chinatowns were these bachelor societies where there are actually like 200 men to one woman. So it's just like telling them like how hard, must dating be back then, right? So that's why there are actually a lot of brothels and opium dens back in the day.
In
People find-
favor of the women.
So there were 200 men,
to one woman, to every woman
One
there.
One woman, yeah.
200 Asian men, like
Yeah.
Chinese men to one woman.
Asian woman, yeah, in Chinatown.
Did any of that one child policy have anything to do with it back in China?
No, I think it had to do with the 1882 Chinese Exclusion
Yeah,
Act.
because the women, children weren't allowed to come in here because they can't help build the railroads, right? Work in the factory. So only the Chinese men were allowed to come in here. And even then, it was pretty small amounts, like only 105 people per year that could come in here. But it was just like fascinating because we would show like a picture of what it looked like back in the day in Chinatown. It was like all men with like top hats and very different than nowadays.
And this might even go way back in history. It's like, well, why did the Chinese people come to America in the first place, right? It's because like there were a lot of poverty in China. So like America was a young country back then. So then they were like, okay, let's go to America to find opportunity, right? The railroad, the gold rush. In the West Coast, but they had no intention of staying anyways. So they were going to go back home after, they became wealthy. But then like some of them did not. So then they find jobs in the city, right? And then they didn't decide to like have the entire family come over. So that's another reason why there's not a lot of women.
Did they initially migrate first more over to California
Yes.
on the West Coast?
West Coast.
Right, because that makes a lot of sense. to
Shorter
me.
distance
That's
travel.
Yeah, shorter distance to travel. And well, when I went out to California and I started making, I guess, more friends, north and south, up and down there, they were all like, and I met the parents, some of them, and they're just all perfect English. Everything. I was like, how are all you guys?
Yes.
Like fourth generation?
Yeah, it was. Let me tell you how awesome it was to be able to speak to them.
Yes.
Like communicate with them, because most of them, like I'll admit, my Chinese is not the best, and it's very broken. It's very what they call juxing, right?
Yes.
And
yeah.
I mean, I can get by a little bit as if we go to a restaurant, if the courtesy stuff when I meet parents, but to get into a deep conversation or when they ask me stuff, I get embarrassed because I'm like, oh man, like my vocabulary is not strong. And when I went out there, all of them, every single one of them spoke English, and I was blown away. And then when I asked them, like, how many? Like, oh yeah, well, like I'm 7th generation here. I was like, geez, because back in New York, right, all of our friends, like we're the first ones.
Yeah.
We're the first American-born kids. So it's just they're way ahead of us there.
It is quite fascinating. So my brother is in San Francisco, right? He would tell me like, oh my God, like all the grandmas and grandpas speaks English, right? We have like Asian people working at Costco. And I was like, okay, that's really cool.
My favorite was when I watched this documentary about Southern Chinese and hearing the Southern Chinese grandma speak with the Southern accent.
I saw that.
Was it Mississippi?
Yeah, I think it might be Mississippi.
Yeah, one
Yeah.
of them, but it was so
It
fascinating.
is a great. Was it with the one with the Chinese food?
cooking one,
the
yeah.
cooking one. Part
What
of
was the story about the family?
Oh, I think it was just like there's Chinese cooking in the South, right? Like,
Yeah,
because
like-
they were talking about like different type of Chinese food, like in LA and New York and the South, and how it's different.
I mean, just hearing her speak was just incredible. It just blew my mind. It was, and her, because she has the Southern charm. When she was saying she has it, this grandma, you just instantly fell in love with her. Yeah, she was great.
It's like a grandma that welcomes everyone into her home.
Like just an air of authenticity. You know, it's just very strong. But when she spoke, it was like, "Hey y'all, why don't y'all come in right
Come right in.
Yeah, I was just like, "What?" I was like, "What is this?" And it was just all this. She had this southern charm. It was just, but then she's Asian, and she had this Asian thing going for her too. And it was just like, oh my gosh, can she be more adorable? It was just, yeah.
There needs to be a Pixar animated movie
I
about
love that.
That would be really cute.
And that's what I'm saying. Like what the media shows, what they portray, just the content that's out there. It's just couldn't be further from reality. You know, at times I think it's outdated. It doesn't work anymore. And I gotta tell you, I know a lot of Chinese people, and I gotta tell you, a lot of them don't know karate. And a lot of them aren't nerds. I'll just say that.
no kung fu,
right?
Keanu.
Or kung fu. Like do you know a lot of, like, the majority of the Asian people that you guys know? Do they know karate, kung fu, or nerds?
Not the majority, but I do know a good
I
like
mean-
50%. Probably.
Oh really?
Because
that's
okay,
pretty
for
good
you.
no,
math.
because
50%.
but because I sought them out. Like when I was
Okay.
growing up, I sought after the kung fu masters in Chinatown.
Oh
So
wow.
it's freaking weird because you go into these, like, on Canal Street, you go to these garment factories, back in, like, go through a hallway, and then you go up these staircases. It's like that.
Some of the places
Mystical.
feel like it's sketchy when you're walking through. I remember one of my friends I used to hoop with, and he was like, "Will, why don't you come through? You'll be great at, like, this karate class, whatever they called it, right?" He was like, "Oh, dude, it's like I'm not gonna say which school, but
It's like a dojo.
and I was young. I was maybe like 13, and I was like, "Yeah, heck yeah, I get to kick some butt," and then I went in. I went in the building. First of all, the building looked decrepit, right, in New York City. And then we did like what felt like 80,000 stairs, right? Just like you guys did today.
Yeah, I was like earlier. I was like, that's a lot of stairs. Like Chloe.
Yeah.
And then we went to this completely dark hallway where the light was flickering. And then we had to, before we even did that, we had to go through this alleyway to get to that. So it was weird. And I was like, hey, are you going to do something weird? Like, yo, this is real sketch, man. And by the time we got up there, then we were able to do all this kung fu stuff. I was like, I'm not coming back here, man.
Too sketchy. For
It's
you.
real sketchy. It's really weird.
And then you go into the kung fu studio. It's actually a really nice studio.
A what?
You go into the studio. It's a really nice studio. Or
No,
is it still,
no,
Oh, it's in the back alley.
It looked like
It's in the back alley.
It's like a back alley, like with potted plants, and like it was just weird, man. I was like, I'm not coming back
like a courtyard. Okay.
here. Yeah, like a little makeshift kind of thing, and I don't know. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. I was like, I'd rather be on a basketball court.
Well, you walked all over Chinatown because of the tours and everything. Was there anything that you discovered here that was like, oh my God, this is so weird. This is like right out of history, or it doesn't, I didn't know this was here before. This is not New York City that I know. Anything like that?
I didn't learn this in the museum, so maybe I have to fact check out some of this. Is this from locals?
Okay,
It's
so
okay,
this
we're
is
on a podcast.
No,
It's all
that's
good.
great. No, because sometimes I feel like museum, like the research history. Mm-hmm. It's been abridged. It's been told, and it's been like edited.
Yeah.
But when you hear stories from the locals, this is like the real shit. This is the real history.
Yeah, so like I have a friend, he grew up in Chinatown. I mean, like in Jersey, I guess. Like you know,
Grew up in Chinatown, Jersey.
Well, he's living in China right now, and then like he told me a little bit of like the gangs in Chinatown, because I actually find that part quite fascinating. Because if you know a little bit of history in Manhattan's Chinatown, the bloody angle, right, where Namwa is, right, there used to be two like prominent gangs that are like fighting against each other. So I asked him this question. I was like, what about now? Like, what about recently? And he showed me some like hidden spots of like, oh, this was like the more like recent gangs, right? Well, clearly it's not happening anymore. Or at least that's what I'm
Not
assuming.
at that level.
Yeah, not at that level, but like
Because it was just so in your face back then. You're like, I have like
Apparently,
30,
yeah.
40, 50 kids, right? Well, when I walk by with my mom, I would see like a bunch of like kids at the corner of a park, and you kind of get the hint of what it was about. So,
yeah, but then like so I was walking with him, and he moved the trash can. He was like, this was where the street that they dominated, it has the initial of the gang name. I was like, What? Like on the bottom of a trash can?
Wait, bottom of the trash can, like
Yeah.
like somebody marked it up
Yeah.
or sketched it.
I never heard of
Yeah.
that.
Interesting.
That's interesting
No,
to get
but
out.
it's on the
So,
ground and it's
that's
still
weird.
there.
Where?
Is it covert, or you have to actually
Or
look for it?
was this-
Well, okay, there were two, right? One
Yeah.
is on Doria Street. You just have to
Okay.
go look. And then the other one is on, I think it was on Elizabeth. Yeah, on Elizabeth Street. But you have to move the trash can. So go figure it out.
It's right underneath the trash can. That is
Yeah.
Oh, so it's on the sidewalk.
Yeah, it's on the
oh,
sidewalk,
okay.
right? At first, I was like, "What are you doing?"
like the Da Vinci Code. Like you gotta go here,
That's
get another
cool.
clue. It's pointing to the Confucius statue. Like you gotta
Exactly.
go there. Like, you know,
They should make a movie out of that too, like Da Vinci
an
Code in
Asian,
Chinatown.
Asian Da Vinci Code.
Because there's so many like monuments around, you know.
So what did that signify? Like,
Well, it
just
was like
where
that
they
was
hung
the,
out?
yeah, that was their territory, right? And then like then I went back and I did my research, and I was like, okay, then like what specifically about that gang? Why were they there? And it actually related to like you know how in Manhattan, Chinatown, there's a lot of like fake luxury bags.
Yes.
So it's that gang initially dominated that area. So and
Canal Street?
Canal Street, yes, and they got really big, and they're actually not Chinese gangs.
It's a Vietnamese guy.
It's Vietnamese.
BTK.
Yes, BTK. So
Oh.
go
This is
find
back,
the
this
BTK.
is back in the 1980s, 1990s.
Yeah, it was like the early like 1980s, 1990s before like the head of the gang he got arrested, and then
Was it David Chang or something like that?
I
What was his
don't
name?
remember his name, but I remember it was in Vietnam.
So I hear.
English.
So since we're doing some Chinatown
Obviously,
history.
have to fact check all of this. Okay.
So, all right, go ahead, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so eventually he got caught, but he was causing a lot of disruption with the Chinese tongs or the Chinese gangs that were around the area back then.
David Tai, sorry, David Tai.
Yes,
That was his name.
But I don't exactly remember how he got caught, but he was trying to like make connections with the Italian mafia and then create like a bigger gang. But obviously he got caught. But then all the luxury, like the fake luxury bags that business is still going on.
So
It's-
BTK started that business
Yes.
so that's they made Canal Street. I
They
guess
made Canal
notoriously
Street,
known
yeah.
for that.
yes,
That's fascinating.
fact check.
So here's where I heard that they were having. You said they had some conflict with the
Chinese tongs.
the
yes.
Chinese tongs. I think initially, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Benny Ong, when he was the godfather of Chinatown, I believe he hired them as a muscle to handle people that needed to be handled, the Vietnamese gangs, right? And at a certain point, they just had a disagreement, and where he didn't show up to the meeting at all,
Yes, yes.
and where David and his group didn't show up to the meeting, and I think or do I have that reversed?
So yes, David, or the head of the Vietnamese gang, he didn't show up to the meeting, and I
Right.
don't exactly know why he didn't show up to the meeting. But it was like a very important meeting to like mend the relationships between the Chinese gangs and the Vietnamese gangs.
Because there was some conflict, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess that was a sign for all-out war.
Yes, but I don't think it went that far because obviously he got caught, and then like that was the end of it. But all that business is still going.
So flourishing. Yeah, I guess
He's
he found a
still
niche in the
alive.
market.
Yeah.
He's in jail though, right?
He is in jail, but he is still alive. But it's kind of crazy to think about it now because then, like, I mean, it kind of happened, you know, during kind of recent, I would say, in the last 30 years.
Wow. Well, yeah, I heard
30, 40 years.
I heard that they were pretty ruthless.
Yeah, it's because they are called Born to Kill because of like what happened in the Vietnam War, right? They witnessed a lot of like, you know, killing and murders.
Didn't they wear that in their helmets?
Yes. It was I think it was the American soldiers.
The American soldiers wore
yeah,
that
they
in-
wore it. It was like Born to Kill. So they took that and, you know, they're very ruthless apparently. Whoever they see around their territory, they shoot or kill.
Asian gangs in general back then were quite ruthless. There was something to definitely be concerned with. Well, any gang for that matter. If, you know, people are willing to solve problems through violence. I mean, I think living in a neighborhood like that, it's crazy. And how much Chinatown has changed, though, from when I used to walk around here. It's at least the face of it. It's incredible. And I'm not just talking about the gangs, but I'm just talking about the businesses. I mean, I'm seeing more and more mainstream American businesses in Chinatown. Or, I mean, you guys are, I'm sure you guys see it during your tours. Well, I guess during now COVID, everything's like, I do see a lot of commercial spaces that are for lease and gated up. But prior to that, I mean, still, there were so many, I guess, McDonald's. Well, McDonald's was great. First of all.
That McDonald's on Canal
Right.
Street's been here since forever.
Right. I think the story behind it, I think the person that bought the franchise or whatever, I think McDonald's went and bought it back.
Oh.
They were getting so much business, they went and that's what I heard. Again, I need to fact check me. Yeah, but I'm seeing like Subway and then Dunkin' Donuts. It was just like they saw one that was just amazing and it worked. They started bringing Popeyes. Popeyes is a great addition because I think
Chinese people love Popeyes.
they love fried chicken. They love, they say like some. I don't think Chinese people get enough credit for how much we like fried chicken. I don't know any like Chinese person that's not a vegetarian. Like the ones that actually eat meat, they're all into fried chicken. Like
even
I
the
love fried
Chinese
chicken,
takeout joints, they have fried chicken wings.
Fried chicken. That's still my go-to to this day. I get my 4 chicken wings with fried rice. And when I was a kid, it was like the chicken wings with French fries for $3, $2.50 at the store. I mean, that was my go-to. You guys talking about preserving Chinatown? It's changing. Where do you think Chinatown's headed in the next 10 years?
I mean, I do think that the change has to do with the changing demographics as well, because Chinatown is an aging, community, right? So a lot of the elderly that live here, they're like 80s, 90s, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There are like new businesses coming in because maybe that'll attract like out of town folks, right? And maybe because they're in Chinatown for one thing, right? For like the new Instagrammable spot, they'll visit the other spots in the neighborhood, right? The mom and pop businesses. So I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's kind of like, how are these businesses like fitting into the community, right? Are they like giving back as well?
And I think this is so specific to like Manhattan's Chinatown, because I've noticed with Boston's Chinatown, it's like a whole different problem, right?
What's it there?
I don't think there are particularly a lot of like franchises coming into Boston's Chinatown. It's more about like real estate, like building up like condo, residential luxury building that takes over Chinatown.
So in Boston's Chinatown, the problem there is that they're changing a lot of the commercial lands to residential uses.
Yes.
Well, that's a big problem.
Yeah, that's a big problem. It's been the problem since like 1960. Like they built a highway that cut through Chinatown, so it already made Chinatown smaller. That's
violation. Why are they always violating Chinatowns like that? But they're still trying to build a mega jail here.
Yeah, I think like for what Chloe said earlier, right? It's just like mixing a blend of the two, because you can't always stay like the more traditional, right? Like then you have to attract more people coming in, and I think that we should probably touch upon the fact that like Chinatown has always been a tourist destination. So like a lot of tourists come here, for the Instagrammable spots. But then realizing that there are people who live in Chinatown who, rely on the community for the day-to-day lives, right? So like the mom and pop shops have to stay too. But then like to bring tourists in, we have to find some kind of like balance.
Yeah, I think it's hard too, because for a lot of these old mom and pop shops, they might not have a successor in the same family, right? So a lot of times they have to sell it to another family, right? Because the kids who went to college and now have corporate jobs don't want to take over and be stuck in Chinatown, right? That's not achieving the American dream. I think that's also hard as well.
And it's tough to run your own business.
Is.
You may not want to be a business owner because you see, like I know I didn't. When I watched my dad run his restaurant, and he was like, son, one day, you can do this too. You want? I was just looking at him. I was like, no, I don't. I do not want to. Definitely don't want to do this. And then he goes, good, son, good.
Trying to scare you away from owning it.
Yeah, he did it. He goes, he's like, if you want to do it with me now, cool. But I think, my dad has a funny way of making me realize things so that I get the full experience. And make me make my own decision instead of just blindly going, yeah, I want to be just like that. I want to yippee-ki-yay, Dad. Like just this youthful exuberance and it could be dangerous when you're very naive, right, or inexperienced about things, or when you just have a very innocent outlook. And my dad showed me how it really was, and I'm 12, 13 years old, and I'm doing my homework at his restaurant and trying to help out where I can. And I just see what he's going through, and he's sweating his shirt is drenched. He's running back and forth in the kitchen, and I stayed with him that whole summer. And the guy woke up at 5:30 in the morning, right? Get everything ready, get dressed, go out there, get breakfast, come back to get me. Like, hey, come on, I'm heading over to the restaurant. Drive me over. We'll go to the restaurant. I see him cleaning, preparing all the food, getting everything laid out. Go through the whole day. His restaurant closes at 10.
Whoa.
10 p.m. after the restaurant closes, right? And keep in mind, it's delivery and it's also dining in, right? And it was a rather larger restaurant. So after that, he had to clean everything up, okay? He'd clean everything up and close up shop. By the time we get out, it's midnight. We go home, and sometimes he'll want to go out. He'll want to just lay back and maybe shoot some pool at a local spot and then go home, and or maybe we would go to the local beach there and just go fishing right off the shore real quick, at some spots, and just so he could spend some time with me. Mm-hmm. And then 5:30 hits, repeat every day for over 10 years, way longer than that, every single day without fail, except for Thanksgiving. That's the only time he shut down, was Thanksgiving.
Not even Chinese New Year?
Because where he wasn't in a Chinese area.
Oh.
It wasn't in a Chinese area. It was in a mixed community of white and black and Filipino. I think that was a majority of the people that I would see coming in.
Yeah.
It was out of state. It's not in New York. So I was like, wow, it was just crazy to see, and I would get tired, and I wasn't even doing a fraction of what he was doing, but there was at least I can retreat back and take a nap, in the little office he had, and then, or I could, I made a lot of friends locally, and we would just get on our bikes and just ride to the nearest movie theater or go down to the beach and hang out, and I go back and my dad was just still working. It was just crazy to see that. And then he goes, yeah, you want to come into the restaurant business, and I was like, no, I'm good. He goes, you sure? You said it when you first got it. I was like no, I'm good. Because I saw all this money coming into the cash register, all the food. I was like, man, I get to eat as much as I want, and look at all this. And when you're a kid, that's a lot of money. And you see, it's one thing, it's not a lot of money if you look at your bank account now, but if you see physical cash, it means a lot more when you can actually see physical cash and touch it and count it. So I started going, wow, this may be a good business opportunity.
You didn't see the bills.
Yeah.
You didn't see expenses.
I mean, this might be a controversial, I guess, question, but do you think because our parents or grandparents, they were pursuing the American dream, and they were pursuing the American dream for their kids to not work so hard, and that was pretty much contributed to the downturn of Chinatown, because you have people who are going to college, they're working corporate jobs, or they're working in mainstream jobs and careers that they leave, and they leave the businesses, they leave and live somewhere else. Do you think that has contributed to the decline?
I think it's also important to note that Chinatown started because as a survival mechanism, right? Because we were discriminated against in the rest of society. So Chinese people had to band together to start up their own communities, right? Set up these Chinatowns because they weren't welcomed in the rest of the city. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that, second, third generation Chinese Americans are getting more assimilated to American society. I think, again, it just comes down to balance, right?
Yeah, actually, you might see this in other immigrant groups too, like the Italians, for example, right? I think it all comes down when you're maybe second and third generation, where you have time to think, where what does my identity mean, right? What does it mean to be Chinese? What does it mean to be American, right? So going back is it's not exactly the decline of Chinatown, I would say. It's just a transition. I almost want to put it. It's
an evolution.
Yes, an evolution. It's the ever-growing Chinatown, because Chinatown can't stay stagnant too, right? It would not survive. So it's how do we grow strategically, with the new generation and with different types of thinking. That's why when we talk about mom and pop shop and franchises coming, you got to have a little bit of both, right? Because you have some that serves the people who are living there, but then we also have to figure out how to adapt to the new.
Do you feel that Chinatown's being gentrified?
I want to say yes.
Yeah, I think it's undeniable that definitely gentrification is the reality. But again, it's like, what can we do? You know,
We do want to preserve stuff, right? We want to preserve like what's important, like history, landmarks, and you know, history is like getting created every single day. I don't know, like gentrification, like is definitely happening. It's just like, how do we balance it where it's comfortable for the people who are slower to adapt to, right?
because I think that it's also nice that there are new business coming in Chinatown. For example, like we see the new Lantern Candle Lab in Chinatown, right, which is like a candle making workshop, and You and Me Books, right, which is a bookstore started by Asian Americans. So these weren't necessarily businesses that are historical, but it's nice that Chinatown has provided space for these second, third generation Chinese Americans to come here and find a space for them.
Yeah, so like in a revolution, not decline. Chinatown's here to stay.
So you see that sort of gentrification as a glass half full.
Yeah, I would say like half full. Because you can't have like one of each, like nothing changing at all, but you can't have like too many change at once, right? Like I think it's a slow transition into like adapting to the...
That's an interesting perspective. I think a lot of people do fear change. And it seems like you guys welcome change with open arms, and you think that in order to survive, you do need to adapt. I could not agree more with that notion.
You just have to be strategic, I think. Like you can't be like, oh, I'm taking away all the mom and pop shops. And what about all the people who are living there that like relied on them? That's not fair to them, right? But you can't be like, I'm not changing at all. Then it's just like, well, no one's going to come, right? If Chinatown is built as a tourist destination, then that's going to be bad too, right? It's like, where is that balance? And, you know, like finding that balance is definitely difficult.
Yeah, because gentrification sounds like such a bad word, isn't it? Even when I said it to you guys, you guys kind of paused and looked at each other like, oh, he went there.
That is like politically correct.
Yeah, but in the way you described it, it sounds like it's needed.
When you were talking about the evolution part of it, and I think gentrification, it's going to happen no matter what. It's going to come, and it's already been here, and it's going to change the landscape of what Chinatown used to be. Of course, it's interesting when you said evolve. Now, does the mindset of the businesses that were here, it has to shift, right? It has to shift from that traditional sense, and then have to adapt to what's coming, right? And all the new businesses from Asian Americans who are starting these new businesses, they have to also have that mindset. How do we preserve while also profiting, or how to, making sure that our traditions are kept here? Now, do you see that, like those mindsets? Like, I guess what I'm saying is, do you have these groups of people who, when they open businesses, this is something they come into the business thinking about, like preservation, moving forward, evolving Chinatown, not just just coming in and just taking from Chinatown.
I think most people try to move in to make money, open up a business.
That's what I would
number
think.
one.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Right.
You come into starting a business, you want to make profit, you want to make money, but because this is a specific neighborhood, and new people are coming in, are they coming in with that mindset of preservation?
I think that's very like individualized, right? For example, I brought up You and Me Books. It was the former site was actually a funeral parlor store, and right now they actually kept like the original signage and the original like shelves, and they're doing a great thing of like amplifying the voice of the community. So I think that maybe it's something that second, third generation Chinese Americans think more about versus like immigrants that are just here to make money and to survive.
Yeah, you also have to make money because then like you have to survive, right? Like if not, then you're going to close down. So I think that might be more so in the forefront, and then come afterwards, just like, oh, I'm in here, I'm in Chinatown, right? What can I do? How can I help?
Yeah, I think they have to be very strategic with what they want to do with the location that they have. And for the most part, if the community doesn't agree with it and you can't get business from the locals, then where are you going to get it from?
Well, tourism made I would have to say a majority.
Be careful.
I mean, well, that's because when I look at it, when the pandemic hit, a lot of Chinese-owned businesses, they were hurting. Yeah. So why were they hurting if locals were there patroning the establishments? Well, they're missing the tourists, right? So from my thinking, based on that, is that majority of the business comes from tourism. Yeah.
I also think it's because the local residents, a lot of them are elderly and they are scared of going out because fear of the virus and also fear of the anti-Asian hate crime. So actually a lot of them experienced food insecurity during the pandemic because they were, stuck at home and not necessarily actually going out and helping out these businesses.
All right, let's shift gears here. I want to, since we have you, I want to take advantages of some Chinese history. I want to be put up on some knowledge. Bring it in. Give me something that you think that you usually have on tour, like a good one, where and I don't know where to go. You guys can just do it. Like I want to go on a tour. Take me on a tour.
Yeah, is it street history or museum history?
Just a mini tour. What you guys usually?
It's a combo of both because we do talk about the history of why the Chinese people first came in here, but then we also tie into modern day history, like what has happened during the pandemic, how has the pandemic changed our community, and also the stories behind some of the businesses in the community so that people can actually build that connection with like the business owners as well.
What are some of the questions that people on tour ask you guys?
Other than what restaurant I should go eat after.
Oh my God.
I'm sure that's a big one, or
Like after the tour, like where should I go?
Where should I take a date? I get that one a lot.
Oh, in Chinatown?
No,
or just in general?
Where should I go
my
eat?
non-Asian friends. I want to take my girl out to somewhere in Chinatown. Where should I go?
so hard.
What should I
It
do
is so
after? We actually have
There's a lot. There's a lot of
There's actually
cheap
quite a
places.
few cool spots. That's for date night.
Oh, for date night, yeah. But
Dude,
it's not really.
there's like-
There's Chinatown, but then it's not China.
It's
Chinese
Chinatown, but
restaurants.
there's some like good restaurants, and then you go to like some other low key joints that are really like fun.
So it's a two-parter. You go to a nice Chinese restaurant, then you go to
Gotta do something like
a
a restaurant,
like a rooftop or
You could
something.
do a speakeasy. You could do rooftop. I mean, there's a lot of options. After you could get bubble tea.
Right.
You know,
Oh.
you could pick your bubble tea joint. I've been on a bubble tea binge. I'll admit it. Like, oh my. I on Uber Eats, and it said you're in a top 5% of Patreon. I was like, oh my gosh, I've been overdoing it.
Wow.
I was like, I didn't even know this message existed. They're like, something, thank you. You're in the top 5% of them, and then you want to give a review and this and that. I was just like, holy crap, I'm in the top. Like they better give me some points for
You get discounts.
rack up some discount. They gave me one $5 one. So
Yeah,
far,
not bad. you get one boba.
yeah. But yeah, I've been on a binge. I don't know why. I've just been like craving it. I guess they make it so good there. But I won't shut it out. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of spots in Chinatown. But what are some of the reoccurring ones that you guys get besides the restaurant thing?
I think a lot of them was like clarification on like history, right? Because history is like fascinating. It's like they didn't know, right? No one taught them in school and didn't learn
Wait,
about
so
it.
it's Asians that's going on these tours?
No, well, we have mix.
Okay.
We have Asians and non-Asians.
Okay.
And they were like clarifying history. It was like, oh, this is what happened, or they're like fascinated by like a statistics, right? Like I think one that I like to talk about a lot is like after the Chinese Exclusion Act was over in 1965. From 1965, there were a population of 20,000 in Manhattan's Chinatown. 1980, that is like 15 years afterwards, it went up to 200,000. So it increased tenfold.
Wow.
Which was like crazy to think about what the Chinese Exclusion Act did and the immigration restriction that happened throughout, that 60 years and 60 plus years, right, afterwards. So that's always fascinating. That's like, do they want a clarification on like, oh, that really happened? That's what I have witnessed more so. On
And Chinatown was just one little block at that time, right? Or a
Just
couple of...
three streets.
Where did Chinatown start?
So it was Mott Street, Dorier Street, and Pell Street.
Before that, it was surrounded by Irish and Italian neighborhoods, right?
Yes, that's correct. So like the Lower East Side's always been like, like the immigration area. It started with like the Germans first came, and then, the Irish because of the potato famine, and then Italians, the Jewish, right? And then like the Hispanics, and then like the Chinese. It was truly a melting pot. And then afterwards so it becomes Chinatown, and there's a lot of very fascinating history, right? Like the first tenement building is on Mott Street, so that's always very interesting. And obviously, like Columbus Park was built because they want to kind of get rid of the gangs, and they thought like a park would help like beautify Chinatown. So
And that would get rid of the gang?
it worked though.
Did it really? I would
Yeah.
think that's where where you could a great opportunity to meet gang members and get recruited.
So like where Columbus Park was 5 points, right? So there are 3 streets that like created like 5 point, and it's kind of like an area where you can target your opponent. And it was a really bad area, has a sewage problem, right? And then I guess like the local government was like, okay, we need to like build something. So they built a park, and it was Columbus Park. And eventually, now modern day is like you can see young people playing soccer, and then like the old grandmas.
Oh yeah, it's so nice there
grandpas.
now.
Yeah,
it's so nice there.
I want to say like whenever like my friends come, I was like, if you really want to see like New York as a melting pot, go to Columbus Park
For sure, because then you get these people working out. There's like this section over there next to the basketball courts, and you get these guys. I don't know if it's still there, but when I used to go there as a kid, I went to summer camp right on Pell Street, and then we would go to Columbus Park a lot, and I would see kids playing basketball, and then you would have right next to it that little park area where people do pull-ups and push-ups. It wasn't real. It was like a jungle gym for adults.
That's where. Oh, sorry. Right. That's where the 5 points is.
Yes. And then you have the other area, the larger portion of the park is, I guess, for kids. You're just running around, playing tag and doing all that stuff. And you would see just a mix of everything. You see tourists there. Then you see the old people eating. And then if you go further down the park, then you see like Chinese collective playing, I guess, chess. Yeah. They would play music. I don't know, one of those. I'm not.
Stringed instrument.
What's it called? It's beautiful when they play it, but they were just. And then you have some of the psychic palm readers.
Right there in the corner.
I mean, you see all these fascinating different. And nowadays, now that they have the soccer field there too, now you see like a bunch of people out there, summer camp kids, and it's just. I love the way it's changed. It's. I mean, especially when what was out there. They had this. What was that called? The whole rally, the huge one.
Stop Asian Hate rally.
Yeah, but was that what it was called?
I think so.
Yeah, it was actually. I do remember that.
Norman and I've been in so many rallies.
Yeah, when it was on the peak of like the Asian hate.
And then to have it there, and then you would still see the same makeup. It didn't really change, except that nobody was playing soccer because
it took over.
It took over that, but it's just beautiful. I think Chinatown has its beauty. I'd love to see some of the things stay, and I agree with you with that it does need to evolve to attract more tourism, more foot traffic, and I think it will.
Or might not. I think it's just you have to figure out like how do you preserve this community in a way. Maybe it's not tourism, right? Like maybe it could be something else. But I think it's up to the hands of the business owners and like the lawmakers to kind of like. I don't want to say like dictate. It's like as if we don't have a choice, but just the like evolution of what Chinatown will be.
Number one thing is people need to feel safe. At the height of Asian hate, there was a lot of food insecurity, especially for the elderly, because they were afraid of coming out, either catching the virus or getting assaulted. I mean, it's a double whammy there. And then the businesses were hurting, and because the businesses wasn't getting foot traffic, they had to close early. They opened late and closed early, and then they had to reduce their staff. And eventually, they couldn't make ends meet because of the cut hours, so they had to look elsewhere.
But do you think there's a resurgence now, people coming back, because there have been in the past few months new establishments opening, like you said, restaurants.
Hold on, shout out to my man Wilson.
Wilson.
No, he made a post, right? That was on. Yeah. I saw a few people send me pictures. Yeah, during I think Christmas. Was it? I mean, this guy had a line from Namwa all the way to the end of the block circling around. I mean, it was incredible just to stop by there and eat.
Around the block, like around Pell.
What's his name? Joe took a picture of that.
Oh, okay,
who else? I think Wilson posted a picture of that. So I thought it was incredible to see that it's back. It's funny because when we had Wilson on the show and we were talking to him, he was just saying how he's adjusting and he had to do a lot of like. He had pivots. To be a lot of pivots, and he had to get really clever with how he managed his business in order to survive and to be able to keep his team together. And he's a great. I mean, if that's one guy to have a leader, because if you're working for someone like that can put you in the right direction in your team that you can trust, and you can just do your job and let him navigate through some of the strategic day-to-days. I mean, I think they're very lucky to have a team, with that at the head. And he was doing online classes. on how to make
Oh,
food.
yeah, I saw.
And he would deliver some of these goodies.
Frozen goods.
Yeah, he found different ways to different markets outside of Chinatown. And now that I guess people are getting used to what this is, right, in the new world that we're living in, during Christmas Day or one of the holidays, I mean, the line was just ridiculous. It was insane. And this was when Omicron was already out, when people knew about Omicron. Am I saying that right? Omicron?
Omicron.
Omicron? I'm still working on that.
Omicron. I call it Omicron.
It sounds more dangerous than like Delta.
Does it?
Sounds like a transformer. Yeah, I mean, what Will mentioned, and there are several other new restaurants that kind of came back. Well, not came back, but opened up in the community.
I think people will always have an appetite for Chinese food. I mean, like Jewish people, they eat Chinese food for Christmas, and Chinese food as American as apple pie, right? I mean, it's integral to the American cuisine.
So your answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I hope so. And it's just one would hope that the place where we grew up, and how you guys connected, stays so close to your hearts, that something like this, there will be a place, and it's in the future.
Where are you guys looking to do next?
We definitely want to get incorporated. We want to build a solid foundation, and continue doing the work that we're doing, which like on social media, we do promote a lot of like businesses, and we do still want to do the bread and butter of what we do, which is to give tours, right? But we also maybe want to expand on our virtual tours, maybe like figure out, we want to find some volunteers or interns to help with like, giving the tour or social media. So I think generally in 2022 is kind of where we're headed, and how do we build our platforms.
How did your, business pivot if it wasn't, in-person tours, right? You said virtual tours.
Yeah,
so.
we've done virtual tours. Also, right now we're looking to partner with business owners, to promote their stories. So there's a lot we can do, in the meantime.
And partnerships. I think partnerships take up a lot of our time too, right? Like if we want to like create like an event, we have to dedicate some time to do that as well.
Did you guys like partner up with one for Chinatown as well?
We did, yeah. We did.
Shout out to Leland.
Yes.
Shout out to the Monday runs.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not part of it anymore.
And run Coach Kai.
Yes, Coach Kai too.
Yeah, so we did like the history run, and we donated the money to Apex, and that was really fun actually. A lot of people showed up, and it was a really fun 5K.
Yeah.
So is that something like partnerships? I guess that would be kind of the evolution of future, more future tours with other organizations.
Yeah, and I think in that way, that's how Chloe and I kind of give back to the community too, right? Like we do give tours and we profit from it, but we want to give back in ways like we work with local organizations and see like what we can do to help.
I'm just curious, like with all the partnerships and the organizations that you have locally, has there been any conversations where the conversations that led to preservation of Chinatown, like has there been any deep conversations like that where what's the future of Chinatown going to look like with the organizations building or helping evolve it?
No, we have particular conversations with like organization in that deep of a level. I think all these grassroots organizations are trying to help in different ways, and it might be even kind of early in like where they find their niche, right? Like Welcome to Chinatown does something different, Sun Chinatown does something different. I think Chinatown does something different. Obviously, Mott Street Girls, we specialize in Chinese American history, right? So it's like finding a way where you can help in different ways.
Do you see history being made now?
Absolutely. I think with like Stop Asian Hate, obviously, like that will definitely, I feel like one that go in the books. And like Chloe mentioned earlier, there's a silver lining to COVID and pandemic. It's like all these grassroots organizations came up, and I think that can probably dictate like the future of Chinatown and what that will look like, right? So like you have these maybe like second or third generations coming back, like I want to help out, right? That's where I grew up. And how can I be of help to preserve Chinatown or help Chinatown?
Do you see it expanding to other Chinatowns?
So we actually went on like this wonderful. They were like a travel company, and they pulled together different people from different Chinatowns, and we were on like a
Panel event.
panel event, and we talked about like, you know, Chinatown. What is it like in San Francisco's Chinatown? What is it like in
Like, how did racism impact tourism in each respective Chinatowns?
Yeah, and I think that like every Chinatown has their own distinct problem. Like I mentioned before, right? Boston Chinatown isn't so much like new businesses or franchises coming in. It's more of like commercial real estate. Like how do we, you know, keep the people who cannot afford to pay rent, pay like, you know, minimum rent, so then like they can still be in the community and just not taken over by, you know, like luxury apartments and stuff like that. And I'm sure like San Francisco's Chinatown faces very different things. Seattle's Chinatown faces really different things. LA Chinatown, actually, what I've heard from some people is just like it's almost disappearing, and you wonder like why.
Almost disappearing.
Like there's not a lot of people going to it. They would go to like, I guess like the outer areas where maybe like San Gabriel.
But they have a strong K-Town though, right?
Yeah, they do actually.
The K-Town's very strong and thriving. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's just like different area has their own distinct problems.
Why do you think that is? Like where the Chinatowns appears to be, I guess, not that lively there.
I almost think it's just like geographically, right? Like if you think about like Manhattan, Chinatown, it's like very like accessible, you know, like a lot of people come and hang out, right? And I think maybe in California, you have to drive, right? Like, do I want to go to Chinatown or do I want to go somewhere else? And
but you have to drive to the K-Town there, right? And K-Town's doing just fine.
That I am not sure. I may have to do some research and look into it.
When I move to any new neighborhood, it's not just that, but I look for my staples. Like, where's my favorite pizza restaurant?
Yeah.
You know, my Japanese. Yeah, I'm a big pizza head, right? And I need my go-to Chinese spot. You know, and I'm just when I hear my friends talk that live out there, it's none of that. You know, and
yeah, and
they told me the food is different too.
Yeah, I almost want to think like there is a lot of Chinese people in San Francisco, right? It's like San Francisco is the first Chinatown.
I love their Chinatown.
Right,
Yeah.
and I don't know what the, I guess, like history with in LA. Maybe the Koreans dominated. So then like their Koreatown might be more, you know, populated, right? Actually, when I lived in Utah at one point, right, I went to the Chinatown, and it was just one mall with the Chinatown gate. I was like, this is so sad.
It was a mall. The whole Chinatown was a mall.
It was just a supermarket. I was like, okay, this is so good. So like it's because there were no like barely any Chinese people there.
So it looked like if there was an attempt was visual, that's what it would look like. There was an attempt for.
Maybe it's the people that makes Chinatown.
I think it is the people.
Yeah.
For sure. Like Manhattan's Chinatown has a lot of people, a lot of grassroots organizations that want to help, which is amazing. But not all Chinatown have that resource.
I want to know why different Chinatown foods taste different.
That is very
different.
You know what I mean? Like they all have this signature like grease or this signature just taste, and I, as much as I love New York and where I'm from, Toronto's Chinatown is next level. I don't know why, but when I was there, and I like, no matter where I went, the food was just, it tasted really good. Like cleaner and higher quality.
I think it's a demographic that's different because Manhattan's Chinatown is a working class community. Like a quarter of the people live below the poverty line, whereas Toronto's Chinatown, obviously it's like more affluent people move there. So they're catering to the locals' tastes, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I think that's why.
Yeah, I think I spoke to someone that says Toronto is a lot of people from Hong Kong.
Yeah, so like the wealthier.
So, wealthier. They actually wanted to live in Toronto.
That goes with Vancouver too, right?
Yeah, Vancouver. Yeah. And then, so in the older Chinatown, it's more immigrants that come in.
It feels like here, it has that New York vibe. Like it's just, when I order my food and it takes like 2 minutes and I'm out, I'm like, wow. Sometimes it's
2 minutes, damn, really, I'll get scared.
It's really uncomfortable how fast they make my food sometimes. That's all I'm saying. That's like, and I love it. I don't want to wait a long time, but sometimes if it's too fast, I'm just like, wait, hold on, man. I literally just ordered this. Like, you had it just sitting there. Like, that was real. I had to double check something. Like, wait, is this is this what I ordered? I look in, I open, I was like, this is what I ordered. And then the steam coming out of it. I was like, how y'all do that? Your walk must be like on 1,000. Like, what is?
I think so. I mean, those walks are super hot.
Yeah. It's next level how fast and efficient they are here. It's that New York, and the mix with the Chinese productivity level is just out of this world. Like, it's just super fast service. So, all right. Anyway, you got anything else?
But I just want to thank you for coming in. I mean, you guys are doing some great things for the community, and continue telling our stories.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It was a lot of
Thank
fun.
you so much.
My pleasure. Is there anything you guys want to share? Any last thing you want to get off? And
Follow us
on Instagram.
social media on Instagram.
how do they do that?
Go on Instagram, like follow.
What's your
No,
IG
what's
handle?
your
What's your
handle?
website?
So our IG is Mott Street Girls.
Got
I
it.
said that.
Much.
Mott Street Girls. Do you guys have a website
Yeah.
or anything? Or
We are in the process of working on
okay.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the two of us, so I feel like sometimes it could be a little difficult because we do work full-time jobs, so like managing that and
Oh, and how do people find out about the events that you hold, like the tours and everything like that?
Usually through our Instagram page.
Okay.
We'll,
Okay. So your one-stop shop is Instagram.
yes.
yeah, for now.
How do I do again? I go on Instagram. Hold on, let me take notes.
Wait, what's Instagram?
Instagram. I'm not that old. Come on, like.
Well, follow us on Mott Street Girls.
Follow you. You know what? I am inactive on social media, so that is one thing I'll give you.
I feel like I'm not that active.
Yes.
It's because we're too active on
enough.
Mott Street Girls to be active on our
You guys, like I slid on the DMs. You guys responded like super quick, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for putting up us and sharing some of the history.
Lucky
Thank
boys
you.
out.
Lucky Boys Podcast.